Hello everyone, welcome back. I hope you guys had fun with last week's assignment. I wanted to give you guys sort of a change of pace and a bit of a break because I know that listening to me ramble on all the time can be a little bit less than fun, even though I love chatting with you and I really wish we were in the classroom. Anyway, so as I'm sure you've noticed, I'm behind in grading your quizzes, and so you get 2 extra credit points on quiz 2, and then quiz 3, I'm going to try and get that done ASAP too, and if it's not done by Friday, you'll get 2 extra credit points for that one as well. So this gives me incentive to get going. Now, the lectures 9 and 10 are what we're going to focus on today, and so we have a lot of good stuff to talk about, and there's also a couple of videos I'm going to ask you to watch that are actually pretty interesting too. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is the fact that climate has changed, okay? And so it has been a lot colder than it is now in Earth's history, and it's been a lot warmer than it is now throughout Earth's history, okay? And we're going to cover that in a little while. Now, the natural climate change happens through what are called Milankovitch cycles, okay? And we'll talk about this in more depth in the next couple of slides. But this is what tends to drive the glacial cycles. You guys have probably heard of those, and the interglacial happenings that happen. But there's also climate change that scientists feel is happening today. And part of the evidence comes from what's known as the increase in carbon dioxide. And so this is measured, as you can see here. Once again, we see a graph, and the first thing you do is you look at the axes. So we have a nice record since the 1960s on, looking at the carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere. And this is measured at Mauna Loa, Hawaii. Okay, and as you can see, things have been steadily increasing. Now, there is variation in that pattern, and that's annual variation that happens, and that's just due to the physics and the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. But what we do know is since 1960, things have definitely been climbing, and we'll talk about in the next few slides why that's actually an issue. So scientists are hypothesizing that the reason CO2 has increased is because we've been steadily burning fossil fuels since actually much longer than the 1960s. So they're called fossil fuels, as you know, because they come in the forms of coal or natural gas, and all of that comes from long dead creatures that existed millions and millions of years ago. And so once we run out of them, there won't actually be any more. Now, where these happen to come from is a time period that happened about 360 million years ago during what was known as the Carboniferous. And we call it the Carboniferous because that's when all of the carbon fossil fuels were formed, okay? So imagine, if you will, you invent a time machine and I would say make the mistake, but some people might actually want to go back to this time period. And I'm going to have some videos in the link for class today, and I'd like you guys to watch them. It's basically the age of giant insects. So we're talking about dragonflies with a 3-foot wingspan. We're talking about millipedes the size of a car. Big insects, spiders the size of your head, although that's slightly controversial, but cockroaches that are also huge. Okay, so, if you're not an insecty kind of person, it'd probably creep you out, and I'm not going to lie, I fit in that category. But the thing is that there were high CO2 levels in the atmosphere, high oxygen levels in the atmosphere. It was very warm, the forests were very lush, and all of this, once it actually died off, eventually provided the materials for the coal that we rely on for fuel today. So if you haven't yet, go watch the couple of videos that I have to illustrate the large insects. And I'm telling you, if you ever invent a time machine, be careful where you go. I personally well at this time, but that's just me. Now, the reason that scientists are so concerned about CO2 and temperature levels is the fact that if you look back in time, and here we have 2 graphs, and once again, we're not going to panic because we read that the top one is CO2 concentration in the atmosphere, and that was information has been accumulated for samples taken that are at least 400,000 years old and younger, okay? And then the bottom is the temperature that's been inferred using other sources, okay, again, starting at 400,000 years and moving forward to today. And I want you to look at the patterns of the two. So CO2 levels go down, temperature goes down. CO2 levels go up, temperature goes up. Start with the 400,000 and follow it to the right, okay? CO2 levels go down again, temperature goes down. If it goes up, they go up together, okay? And you can kind of see that one tends to be correlated with the other. Well, modern day, we have increasing CO2 and probably temperatures are going up. Now, it may not be widely advertised, but it really should. Some areas of the United States and other places are actually starting to show increase increase sea levels. Okay, I think Atlantic City is one of them. There's other places as well. And so for those of us who would love to live on the water but don't, or who do live on the water, and by the way, that's not me, too expensive. But anyway, that poses a problem, because then if the ocean levels and the sea levels start to rise and your house is there, well, it's going to be an issue. Now, I'm not talking about Hollywood, everything floods overnight, or anything crazy like that. But there are some changes that are happening now. Look up rising water levels in Atlantic City. So take a second, pause lecture, and Google that. Okay? And Atlantic City back in the day was famous for gambling and all sorts of other things. It's an interesting place. But right now they're having a lot of flooding problems, and this is starting to show that things are changing, which from a science perspective is fascinating. Human perspective, little worrisome. So now we have a blank slide, and that's intentional, because what I want you to do is pause lecture again. Sorry, we have a lot of field trips here, a lot of activities to do today. And what I want you to do is think about, okay, if you're a species, how in the world do you respond to climate change? Okay, obviously we're going to address this in the slides to come, but I want you to think about it first and make some guesses about how certain species respond to climate change, and then jot them down here. So unfortunately, one way that species have responded to climate change in the past is, well, they haven't, and they go extinct. Woolly mammoths, this is hypothesized. We also said the overkill hypothesis. I don't think they have to be mutually exclusive, to be honest with you. But, a lot of species can't withstand such drastic change in climate when the resources that they need for survival disappear. Now, there are a lot of species right now that seem to be heading towards this trajectory. Okay, polar bears are famous for it. Walruses also seem to be becoming lower in numbers. Narwhals, I don't know if you've ever seen these guys, they're so cool. They basically have a modified tooth that grows through the protrusion from their head, and so it looks like they're a unicorn. Okay, so that they're called narwhals. And copepods, okay, are also getting lower in number. And all these guys depend on cold temperatures. They're all adapted to it. And because of that, they're struggling right now to survive. So when you have these temperatures that are increasing and you have critters that depend on the ice in the ocean to survive, you can imagine that they're starting to lose their habitat. And so I've read certain papers where it's suggested that polar bears are drowning because ice is becoming so infrequent, and as they're trying to hunt for food, they're actually not able to, and so many of them drown because they go from one floating iceberg looking for another one and they can't find it, which is horribly sad. I'm hoping things get better, of course, as does everyone else, because despite the fact I wouldn't want to meet one in person, I'm still rooting for them, and I want them to be successful. So the second video I'm actually going to set you up with shows the collapse of the ice sheet that is also happening right now. Okay, so when you have large glaciers and so forth that end up collapsing, and you have critters that depend on them for their very survival, once again, you're losing habitat. So pause the lecture now if you need to. If you haven't looked already, go take a look at that video that's showing the collapse of the ice sheet. So the second potential species response, the first one we said was extinction. The second one, so write a number 2 next to this, by the way, is for plants and animals to actually migrate. Now, plants we know can't move themselves, but what they can do is have seeds for the next generation that happen to move elsewhere. And so overall, over a lot of time, populations actually do shift in where they're located. We have hundreds of species that actually seem to be migrating, which is, to me, a fascinating thing. That they're able to actually go follow their optimal temperatures and optimal habitat. I'm happy to see it. The fact they can do so. One example, they're finding armadillos in the Carolinas right now. And so now I've actually seen videos of people who have taken armadillos and they've domesticated them, not bred them, okay, but they've tamed them down, I guess is what I should say. And I'm not going to lie, they're super cute. Okay, they can actually play with toys much like other critters. And I think that's fantastic. The only downside to this, and the fact that you've got species moseying across a land that you don't normally see them, is that armadillos actually carry leprosy. Okay, so if you see one, don't go out and pet one. Leprosy is pretty serious. Back in the day, people used to get quarantined, and I think that's eventually what happens is your skin starts to rot off of you, and let's face it, nobody wants that. So armadillos are a carrier for this. They don't exhibit symptoms, but they carry the disease, okay? So don't go petting any armadillos. You can just admire them from a distance. Another way that species are responding, so this is number 3, okay, is that they're adapting. And so one way they can do this is they can adapt in their timing of how they do things. So a great example of this, by the way, is based on a little Baptista flower, okay, that's found in the Midwest. And what I want you to get from this graph is the years. This is a pretty cool study, by the way. It's been done for over 70 years now, which is very impressive. So what they look at is the day of the year when the first flower pops out, okay, in let's say 40s. And over time, they've been gathering this data, all right, as recently as the 2000s. And what I want you to notice is that, the average day that this would first flower is somewhere around May 20th, okay? But however, by the 1990s and 2000s, it was definitely more like the May 15th, May 10th. Okay, what does this suggest? Well, these guys are potentially adapting to the warmer temperatures. Now, you might ask yourself, why would they do this? Well, the thing to remember is that plants rely on using flowers to be pollinated so that next generation can be born. Okay, well, they need pollinators to come out too. And so what the plants are hoping for is they set out those flowers that much earlier, then the pollinators will come out earlier. The reason this is a problem, though, is that it doesn't always happen that way. Okay, so not everything is going to be super coordinated, and ultimately that could cause an issue. Okay, so just keep that in the back of your mind. Some species can adapt, timing shifts and so forth, but it might not work perfectly, and in the long run that could cause issues for species. Now, other evidence for this comes in the wildflowers that are in Colorado, because research has shown that they are starting to actually pop out earlier as well. Okay, so all of this combined suggests that there are some serious changes in timing for wildflowers and such. Now, I just realized that the collapse of the ice sheet wasn't a movie. My bad. I was thinking I had a movie for that, but I don't think a video for that, but I don't think I do. The collapse of the ice sheet, however, is on your lecture slides, and you can see here over time, and you can also see the timing of when things did collapse. And it was a pretty big ice sheet, because what I want you to realize is this is satellite imagery. Okay. The other slide I want to go over with you is one that was slide number 6, and this is the question, is it really humans causing this climate change? Because I definitely need to explain this, okay? So, the best way humans can figure this out is to use models, because we can't go back in time. We don't have an experimental planet, okay, that we can keep everything the same but have no humans. That's not the way it works, okay? So we have to use models to figure out, okay, what potentially best explains what's going on right now. So, this was from a paper that was published not too long ago, and it's pretty fascinating, and it was trying to address, is it humans causing climate change? So what they did was they entered all the different parameters, okay, that they could figure out that were important with regards to climate change, but they kept humans out. Good luck. But they did keep humans out of the model, and they looked at the results. And so if you see the model results on the temperature anomalies on the top graph, okay, what I want you to get from this is they're looking at degrees, and then they're looking at over time, okay? And if you take humans out of the equation, the model results don't really fit what's observed. That's a problem, okay? So go down to the second one, where once again, they had those same parameters for the model, but this time they included humans, and they wanted to see if the model results would match the observations for what we're seeing today. And if you look, it definitely does match, okay? Now again, it's a model, it's not perfect. We don't have a control planet without humans. We don't have multiple planets to do experiments on, but this does suggest that humans do seem to be behind the climate change. Now, you're not going to see this in the recorded lecture, but go back to slide 6 in the actual slides of what I uploaded for you in class, okay? And that's where you'll actually see this pattern. And then the collapse of the ice sheet is in slide 10. If you guys run into any trouble, please let me know. You guys know that I'm always here to help, but I'm sorry they didn't show up in the recorded version. I don't know what happened. Conversions don't always work, and you guys know I've been ready to scream with the computer lately, so just bear with me and let's do our best. Now, all is not lost, by the way, when it comes to species moving around, even if humans aren't necessarily paying attention. And so there are some suggested observations that indicate that some species might be able to actually bounce around on their own. One of them comes from a species known as the Kino checker spot. Okay, so the Kino checker spot is found in California, near Los Angeles. It's very rare, very endangered. Researchers were trying to figure out if, in fact, they should help this species migrate around Los Angeles and move north. And so there was even a symposium dedicated to the Kino checker spot, if that tells you anything. An entire symposium dedicated to a species. That's a dedicated batch of scientists. But anyway, they held this symposium because they were worried about the species' survival, and lo and behold, they actually learned from some scientists that actually discovered a population that had moved to the other side of Los Angeles. So these guys seem to be moving north on their own. Okay, so what does this mean? Well, maybe certain species can actually make it, despite the fact that humans have set up a whole bunch of barriers for them. And this may change our view on how we should conserve them, but maybe it won't. Okay, so some species will likely make it. Some species probably won't. Humans do have a big influence on this, and so it'll be interesting to see what happens in time. So this is the end of Lecture 9. Okay, now there are a couple of videos I'd like you guys to watch, so please watch those videos before you move on to Lecture 10, and I will chat with you again soon.